Welcome to the Colorado Trial Lawyer Connection, where Colorado trial lawyers share insights from their latest cases. The pursuit of justice starts now. Howdy, everyone, and welcome back to part 2 of a 2-part episode on the Colorado Trial Lawyer Connection podcast, where we're going to talk with the main trial team on the case involving Officer Ramos. And this, of course, as a recap, is the case in which Officer Ramos fired multiple shots at an individual. I think maybe he hit the individual, but he hit lots of people that were behind the individual, resulted in a spectacular verdict in Denver County. And we are fortunate today to have who, by all accounts, are the main workhorse, the main trial team, the main brains behind this amazing result. So with that, I would love to welcome Crist Whitney, Ciara Anderson, and Omeed Azmoudeh, hope I got that right, to the podcast. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Hi, thanks for having us.
So, Crist, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and how it is that you became a trial lawyer.
Well, I'm originally from New Jersey. I came to Colorado, I want to say around 2001. I was a music artist for a long time. And then
Wow.
I started writing, I wrote a couple books. I went back to school because I wanted to be a better writer. And while I was there, I started studying history, poli sci. And then I met a professor who suggested, after writing a brief about the water rights for the Standing Rock tribe, suggested I go to law school. So then
Wow.
I applied, and fortunately I got in. I always wanted to do like civil rights law, considering, a lot of police brutality that, the black community, sees on a regular basis. So that's something that inspired me and pushed me through law school. And then once I got out of law school, I met with the heads of the firm here at Rithad Muhammad Bai, and luckily was asked to join the team. And now I'm here now. So
Well, what a great firm you landed with.
I
Great
agree.
story. So I want to go back to the music piece because I was in a band for 20 years.
Wow.
What'd you play?
Actually, I was a hip hop artist. So I
Okay.
was an MC.
All right. That's fantastic.
I've recorded
And
over maybe 100 or so songs.
wow. And I sometimes wonder if this is just me thinking out loud. There's the Lady Gaga song, it's all about the applause. And I wonder if people that are in bands, like we want to be praised on this like subconscious level. We want to be on stage. We want the crowd to applaud. And so we find ourselves in the courtroom where I guess that's the next best thing, but I digress. So that's fascinating story.
Thank you.
Ciara, what about you? Did you always know you wanted to do trial work?
If you had asked me 10 years ago, even, I wouldn't have even known that I wanted to be a lawyer. I had always had a plan to be a psychologist and a substance abuse and work with people who struggled with addiction. And then after undergraduate, I didn't get into the graduate program that I had wanted, and I didn't want to move back to Nashville. I'm originally from Tennessee.
Okay.
So I moved to Colorado with no money, no plan, and no idea what the world had in store. And it worked out, thank goodness. I got a job at a law firm and was going back and forth between Teach for America or the LSAT. And I did a little bit better on the LSAT than I did for the Teach for America application.
Wow.
And then shortly after getting into law school, I did the DU Civil Rights Clinic for a couple of years. And that's my first year doing that. I worked on an excessive force case for a little girl, and was able to resolve that, and then moved on and was able to work on a case involving solitary confinement for a man. And so that really, I grew up knowing what it's like to not have your voice heard in a courtroom. And so really getting to take that client-centered approach and advocate for our clients is really what makes me want to be a trial lawyer and really fuels my being a trial lawyer.
And it sounds like dealing with the solitary confinement case, did that have a profound impact on your sort of core being, on how you represent folks that your firm represents?
Yeah, absolutely. Working on that case, I have a tattoo that says human because I think so frequently we forget that we as attorneys are human, but also our clients are very human. And so just remembering that very human aspect, and that's I have that tattoo in large part because of this client and that experience. But it's a very rewarding clientele. I mean, we get to see people on their worst days and hopefully bring the better side or bring justice to those worst days. So definitely that early client is somebody who continues to inspire me still today.
Yeah, and I find myself wanting to ask but hesitating about the current political environment and what we are seeing with these ICE raids. I just can't imagine. I know how it makes me feel, and I don't specialize in the type of work that you all do. And I can only imagine seeing this. So I guess I'll ask all of you, what does it mean to you personally to be on the front lines of ensuring and protecting our civil rights? And what exactly does that mean? We have civil rights. So, Chris, maybe I'll just throw this at you. What do you think? Like, what are our civil rights, and why is it important to protect and fight for those?
Well, civil rights is pretty much all we have. That's what protects us against the government. And you see, like right now with these ICE raids, a complete disregard for humanity. Like just what we saw the other day, a lady scared driving away and can just be shot like that. And then what's going to happen to these ICE officers? It's like they're pretty much everyone's going to throw their hands up and like, okay, this was fine, shoot. And then you see the power behind it, just to be able to call her a terrorist and to be able to call her all kinds of things as opposed to a human and as opposed to a mother and as there's a big power structure against us as people. And it's like, people like Ciara and Omeed and me, we're like the force between that. And so it feels empowering. It also feels frustrating because a lot of the times things don't change fast enough. At least for me, change does come slow and, incrementally. And, you kind of want things to change a lot quicker. And especially in this situation, like how do we stop ICE from violating people's, not just civil rights, but also human rights? So that's, can be very frustrating as well.
Yeah, it's again, I digress. I won't spend too much time on it. Maybe at the end we can talk about, quote, absolute immunity that the government is professing that these ICE agents hold, and the
It's
absurdity of
outrageous.
that.
Yeah.
It's outrageous. But one of the things, Chris, that you just said, it brings me back. The last trial that I did, I was starting my opening by quoting, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." And it goes right to what you were saying about human rights
Hmm.
and civil rights, but these our forefounders enshrined in our Constitution had the wisdom, these inalienable rights. And I just found it profound. So kudos to you and your team for protecting human rights and civil
And I like
rights.
that quote that all,
And it's so
we hold these
good.
truths to be self-evident. And I believe it starts off, we the people,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
a lot
yeah.
of the times we forget that, especially in a society where it's always the I before the we, so we do forget that, we are, a country, a collective, and, there's a lot of individualism that we hear and people not wanting to go out on a limb for others.
Yeah, I love the endowed by their creator
Hmm.
with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it's so profound for me as a civil lawyer that those rights were the government is prohibited from infringing on those rights. And so when those rights are taken in the civil context, it just makes it profound for the jury to now say, okay, these rights have been taken, and now it's time to right a wrong. So I do love that quote, and I feel like I use it 9 times out of 10. Omeed, sorry for the delay. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how it is that you came to be a trial lawyer.
Sure. I was, for some reason or another, I always wanted to be a lawyer. So I grew up pretty early knowing I wanted to do it. Maybe it was TV, maybe it was a book that I read, I'm not sure. But I pursued the path kind of straight out of the gate. And I went to CU at the time thinking that I wanted to be an environmental lawyer, something like the Sierra Club or Earth Justice. And CU has a great environmental program. And pretty quickly, and maybe this was just a presumption that I acted on and it wasn't right, but what I thought was, boy, these folks are working for 10 years to get, one river flowing, at 5 drops extra than the last 10 years. And I don't know if I can dedicate my life to that. And so out of law school, I went to a big firm to just pay off some debt and get some good training, actually. A big firm here in Denver before stumbling upon really the civil rights path and Siddhartha and Q, who own this firm, and realizing that what a path it was. And I related to it in so many ways, growing up as a brown boy in a 9/11 era, realizing, holy smokes, these are those rights that, were so imperative to me and so important to my own life. And here's an opportunity with the skill set that I have to be able to help other people experiencing the similar things, not the same thing. But I landed here, and I don't know that I would practice law any other way at this point. I mean, I love it.
Yeah, it's I feel the same way. I don't think I could be doing any other type of legal work. And I also went to CU thinking I was going to be an environmental lawyer, but then pretty quickly realized, wait a minute. And like you, grew up watching, Law and Order and the practice, and I was like, wait a minute. So these people are getting paid to do that because it just seemed like it was so much fun. And then from there, I was sold hook, line, and sinker. So, all right, let's get into this case because both Siddhartha and John all agreed that you all were the team that really the workhorse on this. So, how did you all, and I'll try to point questions to individuals, but how did you guys decide the division of work in the case? Was there someone that was sort of the lead on the case?
I don't think anybody was the lead, but we actually had a really honest conversation amongst ourselves and with ourselves right before trial about what our strengths were, not weaknesses, just what are our strengths. And it became pretty clear that Crist is the most personable person on the planet. So we wanted him to handle jurors, difficult witnesses like experts, just so that very quickly where there needed to be a rapport established, who were we, what was the dog that we were going to send out to establish that rapport, that was going to be
Okay.
Crist. And on the flip side, we realized that Ciara is the most organized person and who can tell the clearest story from scratch. And so she did our opening. And I suppose the thinking was that I can think quickly on my feet and potentially nail and hammer things home at the end. So I landed on closing. But it was a choice, I think, that we made, and I'll let the others chime in kind of how they remember that conversation. But that was my memory of it.
Yeah, I would echo what Omeed said. We definitely had to have that honest conversation about, what our strengths were. And I think at the outset, it had been very much tossed up in a very different way. But how it played out after having that conversation, I think it did play on all of our strengths. Omeed, in closing, he also did the cross of Officer Ramos. And so having a person who played a very consistent role throughout the trial, then close it. And he did a phenomenal job. And then Chris, same as Omeed said, he's very personable and immediately likable. And so he connects really well with people and did a great job with the jury selection.
So, Ciara, since we sort of have you on the stage, if you will, talk to us a little bit about what your thoughts were on the opening and not just sort of what you wanted to accomplish in the opening, but for maybe some of our younger listeners, newer lawyers, what did you do to prepare? Did you rehearse? how did you actually go about once you knew you're doing the opening in a highly publicized big trial? You're going to be asking for lots of money. Sounds very intimidating to a lot of people. What'd you do to prepare yourself for that?
Well, long before the trial, I had participated in a trial advocacy training, and so through that, I was able to learn how to do openings. This was my first jury trial and my first opening,
Wow.
and so wanted to do a good job. I think as a team, we all came together and talked about what our themes and our theories and what we wanted to really highlight throughout the trial. And so weaving that in through the opening was very important. And then obviously we wanted to establish credibility. So we wanted to have the evidence that we knew was going to get in without showing too much of our hand because we had a few things up our sleeves. So really preparing and practicing. I unfortunately lost my voice the week before trial, so I spent the whole week not really talking much, but the 2 weeks or the few days before the trial, we met several times as a team, and so went through the mock opening and got feedback, revised, and then wash, rinse, repeat.
And what I would say about that is the way that it was laid out, that opening, the
Yeah. Yep.
organization behind it, and all of the beats, it just felt like perfect. And it was so accessible for a jury. Like they can consume that easily. It was just broken down so plain and clearly. And I just think it was just so effective.
How much time did you have for your opening? Were you limited?
I think we had 40 minutes per side. So, and I didn't use the whole 40 minutes. So yeah, we had a lot of time.
Yeah, the one real advantage I sense from this case is the story is so compelling from the get-go, just factually. Like you sit down, you tell jurors, like, let me tell you what happened in this case. This isn't a rear-end car crash case. This is, a fascinating on the edge of your seat story. And Ciara, I want to ask you, because I think I heard you say that strategically you withheld some really good facts from your opening with the thought being, and I'm projecting here, with the thought being that your case gets better in trial than the opening statement. Is that accurate? And was that strategic on your part?
Well, there were just some things that we couldn't bring up in trial. For example, Officer Ramos pled guilty to a crime. Well, that's impeachment evidence, so we couldn't really bring that in through the opening. But we what we could do is say that our clients were victims of a crime. And so we had talked about that. That had come up a little bit in voir dire too, just because the story had been pretty publicized. So several jurors knew about what had happened. And then I think I heard on the first part of the podcast, the flashlight
Yeah.
story. We weren't highlighting that in the opening by any means, but it's certainly something that Omeed was able to bring up in the closing. And then just things like that. But really, the case and the story is so relatable. Anybody could be an innocent person coming out of the bar early in their 20s. And so really just without saying it, highlighting that, this happened to 6 people. It could have been anyone in Denver, and it could have been a lot
Could have
worse.
been a lot worse. Chris, talk to us a little bit about your thoughts in voir dire. Was it did you find that the panel was like really on your side? That what were your fears and what did you encounter when you actually did voir dire here?
So we went in there with the strategy of finding liberal gun owners. So basically, that was the strategy going in. And so, what I was trying to do is to get information from the jury about what they knew about guns, what they knew about gun safety. And we did find a few that did know about gun safety. And, with the idea that if they're going to know about gun safety, they're going to realize how incredibly reckless this officer was. And so that was very important to have them on there in that regard. And then also, saying liberal, we don't want anyone that is like completely pro police, but I don't think this was anti-police case, because I think this was more about holding someone accountable. So it wasn't necessarily I was looking for someone that is anti-police, but anyone can be, like Ciara was just saying a second ago, anyone can be in that position coming out of the club, and then you have a reckless officer shooting into a crowd. So that was kind of the analysis that I was going off of.
And maybe this is a question for you, Omeed. Is Was this a lack of training issue, or how did it come to be? So I'm sort of assuming that reputable use of force experts say, don't fire into a crowd, don't fire, know what's behind you, etc. So was this a lack of training? Was this a rogue officer? What was the theme as it relates to those concepts at trial?
You know, throughout trial and in closing, we tried to point to every bucket of evidence. And so training was one component. We said that actually it was hard to say that he wasn't trained on this topic. Basically, what we focused on was policies. I mean, training aside, what was most clear was that the policy said don't do this. And I don't even have to get into the nitty gritty of what you discussed, in the academy or in field training about how these policies apply, et cetera. Anybody can read this and understand that this isn't allowed. But really, we zoomed out, and I think this is maybe what was most persuasive to the jurors, was that this is common sense, folks. Guns are dangerous. And if you're going to wield a gun, and we're going to give you the power of a badge and a gun to police our streets, you need to use your common sense. And that's at the baseline. We don't even need to look at policies or training to figure that out. And so I think a common theme throughout the case was just, jurors, we want you to assess, is this the type of policing that you want, just based on what you know? Bring your own experiences into this courtroom and ask yourself, is this the kind of decisions that you want made? And that ultimately proved to be a pretty useful way of doing it, because we didn't have to get into detailed subjects about, what happened during the simulations. We could just ask jurors to use their own everyday understanding of what to do.
So I have a question factually, because my understanding is that the video from the various body cam and other video, that it looked like the suspect was trying to throw his firearm away when he was shot or not. So I'm just kind of curious factually, could someone explain, was that clear what was going on, or was there an argument to be made that suspect was going for his gun and therefore use of deadly force would be justified irrespective of who's behind the suspect?
Yeah, this became a topic in the case that we kind of had to pivot as the case went on. As a very basic factual matter, it does appear, if you watch the video in slow motion, that this person is taking a gun out of their waistband and throwing it away, not taking it out of their waistband to threaten the officers, shoot at the officers, or shoot into a crowd. But then became the question of, okay, assume that that's difficult to see or to comprehend in the moment. What now? And we sort of attacked that big issue in a couple different ways. The first was that, and apparently the jurors agreed with this evidence, was that this particular officer, Officer Ramos, shot very, very, very late in the sequence. He shot after this person had drawn a gun, thrown it away, and was in fact already falling on the ground. And so that's problem number one, is that we're not really even asking this officer whether he thought he was brandishing a weapon in the moment that he pulled it out of his pocket, because that's not when the officer shot. The second one, this was the big pivot. The second one was, okay, let's assume a world where you think a person is actually drawing a gun, but there's a crowd behind him. What do we want our officers to do? And we conceded to the jury that there might be the difficult case someday down the line where a person is actively shooting into a crowd or at police officers, and an officer needs to stop the threat. And the officer needs to accept the fact that their bullets might hit the target, really an active shooter, and also might hit the people in the background. That might be a case out there, but that wasn't this case. Really, in closing, we said something to the effect of, this is not Columbine, because their expert tried to make it like Columbine. He even used the word Columbine. We said, this is not Columbine. Wow. Yeah, and we even said something to the effect that an officer can't be the first person to shoot into a crowd. There needs to be some other strategy, some other tactics deployed before an officer is the first person to shoot into a crowd and say, it was okay for me to do that. That can't be the result that we're okay with. So this case was not the most difficult case on the planet, which at some point will present itself, and some other brilliant litigators, I'm sure, will figure out how to deal with it.
So, and again, factually, because you reminded me, was there another police officer that had had an angle where there was no one behind the suspect, who had fired at the suspect first, and then Officer Ramos then, with a different unsafe angle, fired after that officer? Is that factually what happened?
Yes, there were two other officers who fired with the brick back wall and as their backdrop, and then Officer Ramos, who fired with the crowd of people in his backdrop.
See, to me, that's such a complicated, because that sort of answered my other question of, you can't really argue that the police officers shouldn't have, that the fact that the suspect was throwing the gun away meant no one should have fired, because you've got two officers that had a clear line of sight that did fire. And I'm assuming you weren't critical of those officers firing at the suspect. It was Officer Ramos's firing with the backdrop. Do I have that factually correct?
Our lawsuit was mostly against Officer Ramos because only his bullets could have injured the six people in the background. And so it didn't make sense for us to be critical of the officers who shot Mr. Waddy. Certainly there are some critiques. That just wasn't the focus of our client's case.
Yeah, and it felt like more of a side issue to even involve the other officers. And, the defense actually tried. They were trying to pin it on the other officers, and it seemed a bit ridiculous when they were saying one of the officers, that was dead in front of him, could have somehow fired all the way to the right of them. So, and I think one of the best lines came from Omeed when they were trying to pin it on his wife. And Omeed asked the defendant, he was like, does your wife know you're out here saying all this about me? And I think that was one of the best lines of the trial. So,
you got to explain that,
including his wife. So
I'm not following. Wait, so Ramos's wife was? I got lost.
I'll give you some background.
Yeah, give me some background.
So Ramos was at the time partnered with his fiance, then his fiance. Was also a police officer and on the scene that night, and a shooting officer. And so during the trial, Officer Ramos's testimony was that one of the bullets, or two of the bullets that hit the bystanders, could have come from his partner, his fiance at the time. He didn't call her to the stand to testify to that point. She was not called at all at trial. And so the question during the cross of Ramos was, does your wife know that you're here pointing the finger at her, saying that she shot these people? And it did garner a chuckle.
That line landed.
A few jurors and some co-counsel.
What was his answer to that? And did you know that was that a planned question, or did it just spur the moment?
That was not a planned question. And his answer, I believe, was that him and his wife had actually not ever talked about anything related to this case or his criminal conviction. So no, she didn't know.
It is such a fascinating factual scenario because it strikes me that how you framed your case is so critically important to the success that you received. And just to remind our listeners, this was what, 20 million. I mean, and I do want to ask you questions about your ask and the punitive damage component of it, but the overall verdict was like $20 million plus. Is that right?
It was 19.75 million, so nearing 20.
Okay. Chris, why don't you, no focus groups here, But was it obvious that, given the facts that I've heard displayed here, that the rule, if you will, the rule you never violate is you don't fire when there's people behind? And was it intentional? A, did I get that rule right? And B, was the intent to create the simplest rule that was violated here to make it as simple as you could for the jury?
Yeah, agreed. And that is a basic rule, that you don't fire when there's people behind the target. You're supposed to know your target, and that is a basic rule. And I think that's was very easy for the jury to understand. And when they're going back to deliberate, that's just a basic rule that they can follow. And the case pretty much boiled down to that. It didn't matter like what they were trying to throw into the pot. It's the basic sense that you have to know your target and know what's behind your target.
Who crossed their use of force, Omeed? Was that you crossing the person who referenced Columbine, their use of force expert?
No, it was Ciara and our co-counsel Tony Bjorst who represented 2 of the 6
All right.
victims.
So, Ciara, what did the defendant's use of force expert, did they concede the rule that you don't fire when there are people behind, or did they try to tap dance around that?
They tap danced around it quite a bit. That this is the expert that tried to liken the case to Columbine, which for a Colorado case and Colorado jurors, I think that was very alarming to the jurors and lost some credibility. This was not the facts weren't the same, and so it was so the expert tried to liken it to a Columbine situation, which it just wasn't. And but he wouldn't concede that the officer Ramos did anything wrong. And I think that that's where the experts really came into play. We had our own policing expert, but we also had an expert that did the ballistics and really did a great job of explaining the ballistics. So while their use of force expert wouldn't acknowledge that you can't shoot into a crowd, the common sense really came into play, and or the jurors used that common sense. And the police testimony, also was, even though not designated as expert testimony, the other officers who were there who uh, testified that you wouldn't shoot into a crowd or you have to know your backdrop really played a critical role, and I think really hurt the credibility of the expert who simply would not acknowledge that this was a bad shoot.
So what I'm hearing you say, which sounds really important, is through that your theme was you don't shoot into a crowd, essentially, know your backdrop. And through every witness that testified, you were able to get support for that theme and raise it every single time. Basically, every witness in the case testified. Is that right?
Absolutely. The first 9 words out of my mouth in opening is you do not shoot into a crowd. You do not shoot into a crowd. It's common sense. It's basic police practices, and we expect our trained police officers to know this. We expect any person who owns and uses a gun to know this and to not shoot into a crowd.
Did one of you all cross-examine Officer Ramos at trial?
That's Omeed.
I did,
So,
yeah.
Omeed, what did Officer Ramos say when confronted with that rule, if you will? Is it say, well, yeah, that's a rule, but there's always exceptions, something like that?
He did. Yeah, the testimony to synthesize it was that rule doesn't always apply to police officers. And that's one of those answers that you get and you just let it sit. You don't dig into it and try to eat too much off of it. You just let it sit because it didn't match up with what virtually every other witness was saying. And, it was that type of testimony to sort of deny the obvious was a common theme in his testimony. And, I was often faced with the challenge of, do I get one more question in right now and sort of bite at this? And I tried to exercise restraint and just let the outrageous statements float because there were several. I think another one of the questions that you all covered on the last podcast, which was really a highlight for me was asking him, what's a worse backdrop than a crowd of people? And he said, well, there could be senators, presidents, and very important people. And, in closing, I get to say, according to him, these 6 people seated behind me are not senators, presidents, or very important people. And there were a lot of opportunities like that where you got this sort of, he's really just will not admit the easy answer. And that's okay. The jury will see right through it. There was a temptation often to try to really hammer things home, but it was just, he kind of made the case for us.
And I think the
at times.
important part was the jury. None of them were presidents, senators,
right?
So-called important people. So that means they can get shot too. So,
and Omeed, I'm putting myself in your shoes and imagining the restraint and imagining what would be going through my mind when you're given an answer like that. And was it obvious to you when that answer was given that it would have been worse if there were presidents or what have you behind it to not ask any? Did you ask any follow-up or did you just let it sit? Talk to us a little bit about what was going through your brain at that very moment when you get this gift of an answer that you could not have contemplated, that was going to be the response. What was your thought process?
Yeah, I had read a book. I hadn't attended a conference like Ciara. Ciara, that was a NITA conference, or
Yeah, I attended NITA.
which is would you recommend that resource to everyone out there?
Yeah, it was great. I learned a lot. I got to learn from a lot of really skilled trial attorneys. I did the one that was here in Denver, and I was there for a week. You pick up on a lot of things that you can improve on, and then really you put those skills into practice. So I would highly recommend it, particularly for people who are I'm a little bit more reserved and shy in my personal life. So it did really wonders for my confidence going into a trial setting.
Awesome.
And if conferences aren't your jam, I had read a book called Winning at Cross by Shane Reed. And I'm also sort of a nerd when it comes to trials that are out there in the world. I try to watch a lot of media like this podcast to sort of stay up to date on who's doing some great lawyering out there and what can we learn. And that was a skill that, it's a skill. It's something that you have to develop. And in that moment, what was coming to my mind was, this is an outrageous statement. This is what Shane Reed calls an outrageous statement, and you need to let this one fly. And so I think a lot of times some of the stuff you learn isn't intuitive, and I think people just assume that good trial lawyers, like the 2 here with me today, just become good trial lawyers because they're born with it. But a lot of the stuff is skills that you have to learn and master, and I think in that moment it was a good test. Okay, here's an opportunity to make the wrong choice, the tactically wrong choice, or the right one, and I was lucky enough to make the right one in that moment. And I know we didn't ask any follow-up. In fact, I think I moved to the next chapter, which was about like where he grew up or something like that. So
yeah, kudos to you. I can think back to my younger self. I can still remember one of the first trials I did as a civil trial lawyer was I was a prosecutor for 5 years and then did a civil trial, and it was a med mal trial. And I just beat up this defense expert so much that I'm confident we lost the case because of it. And so you come back to your situation where you're given this gift and just the wisdom to recognize that gift in the moment and not try to win. Because I feel like our natural instincts, whenever we're even like arguing with our spouse or whatever, it's like, I need to win this argument. But to let jurors reach their own conclusion without shoving it down their throats, I feel like is the biggest piece of wisdom that I've come to in recent years as a trial lawyer is nobody wants to be told what to think. And so you have to let them reach that own conclusion. And you get a gift like that and you just let it sit and you move on to your next chapter of Cross shows much, much, much wisdom. So kudos to you. Omeed, talk to us a little bit about how you went about structuring your Cross. You mentioned chapters. Did you have various chapters that you could sort of pivot on the fly depending on how various answers went? Just talk to our younger listeners, if you will, about how you went about preparing your cross examinations.
Yeah, the advice that I got, which was very good advice, was that each chapter needs to have a point, and that point should be as basic as possible. And really, as I was preparing the cross, I would have a point that I needed to make. For instance, training requires knowing your backdrop and beyond. But then as I was going through preparing the cross, the points became actually narrower and narrower and would separate often into their own chapters. And so, a chapter on know your target and beyond turned actually into two chapters. One was about know your target, and the second one was about know what's beyond. And so really, as I think, as I was preparing the cross, the big takeaway that I had was that it can take 25 minutes if it needs to just establish a really basic point. You're not going to win the case in one chapter of your cross. You're going to establish one piece. And really that was the goal, was to take this witness, this defendant, and at each stage of his cross, just prove one thing that's helpful to our case or destroys his. And so we tried to be pretty methodical as we were going through the process. And I think that was really what our entire trial team did. I mean, we were scheduled to go for 2 weeks, and I think the trial was done in like 9 or 10 days because all of us with pretty effectively managed to just boil this thing down to what we needed. Let's not start quibbling with these witnesses in a way that's going to make us lose credibility. Let's just get right down to it and then ask the jury to decide. So that was our strategy.
I love that. And I love what you said, that every chapter has to have a point, and that as you were preparing, those points became narrower and narrower. Did you, as a team, engage in any role playing where you would practice your cross and others would sort of assume the role? Or did you do any kind of that? I'm just really wondering, for younger listeners, what sort of practical trial prep advice for what you all did in this trial? And I'll throw this out to the group. And maybe I'll ask each one of you, as far from a trial preparation standpoint, what really worked that you learned in this case? And Chris, I'll start with you. What was the one thing as far as trial prep that you found was very effective here?
So as far as preparing for our client, what I wanted to do was to get his emotional story out to the jury. I wanted the jury to see him as a person before they saw him as a victim. So I walked him through his life, what he was doing, and there was a funny story about what happened to him right before he was shot, where he's walking up on a girl, and then he's about to talk to her, he sees her, he gets scared. And if he didn't get scared and started talking to her, he probably wouldn't have been in the line of fire. But we had to bring that out because, again, that's a very human emotion. Walking up on a girl, you see her and you get fearful and you walk away. So that's very human. So I wanted to bring that part out. And then also, show his injuries and what was going on before and after he was shot. And then that was the same with the doctor. So I also had to cross the doctor. I didn't want him to start spouting any kind of medical information as to show how smart he was. I just wanted to, keep it very simple, just to show this is not my client's doctor, and that the doctor was paid by defendant Ramos. So again, to keep it simple, and I didn't want to ask him too many things that I didn't know the answer to, because he starts talking about medical information. I'm not going to know anything about that. And then I'm looking at the jury and then this guy is, seeming like a remarkable person. And the doctor was very, very nice. He was a very good person. So I didn't want to poke him too much. So I was I have to, temper myself to come across like that. So those are some of the things that I picked up.
Yeah. And that was something you had contemplated in advance. So you sort of knew when you're cross-examining the defense doctor, I don't want to poke this bear. I know what I want to accomplish. I want to get in, get out.
Yeah.
And you had prepared that in advance, and that's something that you found to be effective.
Yeah, and I didn't know how appealing he was going to be, because he came across as someone that I would listen to and that I would like. So I didn't want to, be annoying, and the jury may like him, so I don't want to, interrupt that. So just wanted to keep it basic and civil.
Okay. Civil, that you mentioned civil. How important is it in this profession to, in front of the jury, be civil that you've seen, Chris?
I think it's important because I think, again, presentation is very important. Character and personality is important. And again, like that goes back to we were talking about politics earlier.
Yeah.
Presentation and personality is very important. So if you're going to come across like a jerk to someone that people like, again, that's a reflection on you. And it's a reflection on you not reading the room. So that's what I was looking at him, and I was like, okay, this is a very nice guy. And if I come across like a bulldog coming at him, then
Yeah.
it's going to make me look foolish. It's going to make him look great, and then it's going to hurt our clients as well.
Wow. Ciara, what one thing in your trial prep in this trial did you think really worked well?
I think collaboration. This is the first time Omeed, Crist, and have gone to trial with Siddhartha and John and the attorneys on the case. And so the collaboration and the trial experience with one another was really great. We work well together, but we work differently. And so really getting to figure out different people's styles and how to make it work together. There were several times in the weeks leading up that Omeed would come in and work out part of his cross. And, I was Officer Ramos more than I was Ciara in those weeks leading up to the trial. And same with our clients. Our clients had the story's easy to tell. They're very great people. They were and a terrible thing happened to them. They were, people out celebrating an anniversary, a birthday. One of our clients who got shot was very endearing and going up to a girl and then getting scared. Another person who got shot was calling his sister to make sure that she took his mom to church the next day because that's something that he did every Sunday. These are real people with real families, and so telling that story was very easy. So it didn't take as much preparation because when you're doing a direct, you're not the star. The person you're doing the direct is the star, and so it was really easy to implement that. But I think overall, I think the collaboration is what I took away from it, and the just being there to bounce ideas off of each other. We're at the office until 3 a.m. working out the closing and, you know, starting it. Okay, oh, I don't really quite like that piece of it. Let's revise it here. Okay, now let's put this into really perspective for the jury, and Omeed then delivered it excellently. So it was a really fun trial. You get a taste of it. You want to keep doing it, but it was great for our clients too, obviously, with the outcome.
Yeah. Omeed, what was the one piece of the trial preparation piece that you think was highly effective here?
I think giving yourself enough time, and if you have the privilege of being at a fantastic law firm, like we are, when it's trial prep time, people tend to take other things off your plate so you can focus, and that became critical, both with respect to the facts and the law. I can think of dozens of times during the case when a factual piece would come up that they thought was important. And as our entire team, we knew, no, we know how to deal with that. And the only way, and the same with the law, in fact, I can think of a particular dispute about a effective date of a particular statute that they thought, they had us on. And we said, no, we've looked into this. It applies, and it applies to this case. And the only way that those little tidbits, which become so important during a trial, come to your mind is that you've given yourself enough time. It's like preparing for a depot. If you start the night before, you just don't have enough time to let it sink in and to develop more complex thoughts about it and to sort of shift your own understanding. So I think one thing we did really well was everybody was just sitting with it, listening to it, feeling it, sort of trying to figure out, what am I missing? What are my blind spots? How can I pivot? And I think we did an excellent job of that. So time, you just got to set it aside. You just got to do it. There's no, I think Abraham Lincoln has a quote, you can't ignore the drudgeries of the law, is something like it. It's just, you got to sit with it. There's nothing else you can do but just sit with it for a long time, and it'll come to you.
What you're saying really lands, because, there's just periods of this job that are a grind. And when you look at a trial like you all did, and someone comes in and looks at how seamless it was, how the outcome, how much fun it looked like being in trial, they see the top of the mountain and they don't see the climb that it took to get there and get ready. So that's really lands with me, because I feel like there's just times it's almost like you have to embrace the suck at times, whatever it is, and it's set aside time and do the grind. So I really appreciate your perspective on that, of, setting aside time, making sure that things come up legally and factually, you're able to, to hit those things head on. Talk to me a little bit we got about a few minutes left here. I'm curious about the punitive damage component of this. So, and Omeed, did you do both closings, or did you do first closing and then one of the other lawyers did the rebuttal close?
I did closing and rebuttal.
How did you approach, because I'm assuming that the punitive damage component consumed a lot of your thought about how to present that and how to argue that with the jury. What did you come up with, and what was your strategy with that?
Yeah, the strategy was actually fairly straightforward. There had been this criminal conviction that was percolating throughout the entire case and would come up at various times. And one tack that they took to minimize the meaning of that criminal conviction was that it didn't come with jail time. It wasn't a felony. It was a sweetheart deal. He had to take that deal basically because it was so good. That's why he pled guilty, not because he was actually guilty of the crime. That was their approach. And so we flipped that on its head for punitive damages. We said, look, folks, if you're as enraged as we are, here's what you should note. This guy's never been punished for this conduct. He told you outright, I got a sweetheart deal when it came to the crime. And so we said, now's your opportunity. You're the only people who have the opportunity as of today to punish this defendant for that conduct. And unfortunately, the way you do it in this setting is through money. And so really all we said was take whatever compensatory damages you award and just double it. Just add another double on top to punish him in a way that he's never been punished. So our strategy wasn't that complicated. And I think actually the work to get punitive damages comes long before the request itself. It's got to sit on a good foundation of these jurors are angry, maybe. They are, this is beyond just liability. They are frustrated with both the defendant and his conduct. And so I think all of the pieces that we had set up throughout the trial, including those outrageous statements that we talked about, sort of led into that final request. And that's the only way that it's credible. If you've got a jury that's thinking this is a 50-50 case and I'm up there saying punish him, we've lost. It's not going to happen. So I think the work to get there was long before the actual ask.
Can you talk to us just for a little bit about your preparation for your closing? Since you did both closings, did you plan out ahead what you expected to do in your rebuttal close? And what did you do to prepare and plan for your first close?
Yeah, this was with the help of our team. It was, I guess the first thing was throughout the trial, I was drafting an outline. As big pieces of evidence would come in and testimony would come in, the outline was already started. And then I'd say about 2 days before, when it became clear that we were going to close on X day, the outline started to turn into something a little more clear. And then really the night before we were to deliver closings, we spent, from the end of trial that day until 3 a.m. with the entire team, preparing a presentation and also just until my eyes were about to fall asleep, and I was about to just pass out on the concrete floor of our office, just saying things over and over and over until they came out to the picture that we were trying to capture. And even, I drove home that night, and there's a light right before my house that sometimes doesn't turn green. And I sat at that light, not realizing that I was sitting at that light at a red light that was never going to turn green for 15 minutes, saying a part of the closing out loud, before realizing, oh, I have to run this to get home, or else I'm going to be here until trial the next day. And then in terms of, organizing it, we just follow the jury instructions. That's ultimately the decision that jurors need to make. And if you're presenting it in any other way, I think we would all posit that you're doing it wrong, because they need a roadmap. And so we just roadmapped them and highlighted the evidence for each of the elements that they needed to decide, and got them there, and tried to stay awake.
And that was amazing, because it was till like 3 a.m, and then at 8 a.m, he's giving that closing. And it was an amazing closing. So the judge had to admonish someone in the back because they made noise after it. So that was
What?
great, because someone was like, "Whoa!"
Wait! I got to hear this story, because I've never heard of such a thing. So tell us the story. The judge had to admonish a juror for making noise.
So someone had made a noise in the background. As soon as it was done, it felt like a mic drop situation. And so there was someone in the crowd. It was like, "Woo!" And then the judge got upset and was like, "We will not have that in the courtroom." But it was truly a great closing. It reminded me of I don't know if you've seen the movie JFK.
Of course.
Yeah. So that closing that Kevin Costner gave, it was kind of like that. Not as emotional.
Right.
And we actually did win, unlike Kevin Costner in the movie. So it was very well put together, though.
Am I stating the obvious that it sure sounds like you all had an immense amount of fun trying this case?
Yeah, I mean, it was challenging. The injuries in this case were really, it was awful. Some of the evidence that came in was horrible. But obviously those aren't our injuries. We can do our best to sympathize, but we can't really empathize because none of us have been there. And we did have fun doing the prep work, but it did feel very weighty. It did feel, I don't know how you all felt after the trial, but it certainly felt like, holy smokes, what did I just go through?
That was
a lot.
Yeah.
I think as a lawyer, we can see that it's fun, but we also take on the weight of our clients. We are advocating and telling a very personal story for these people who have suffered immensely, and their lives are forever changed. They can no longer go to the bars or to the grocery store, couldn't leave their house for a period of time. And so recognizing this very real and personal harm, and telling a jury this story, it it was fun, but it was a lot, and it felt like a real responsibility. But I think that we set aside the time, and we put in the time to really make sure that we were doing everything that we could to tell it in the best way, and I think that worked out to our clients' benefit.
And I think this trial was like a great example of like why we became civil rights lawyers. It definitely felt like we were able to like restore our clients like dignity. And it did feel like they were relieved in a sense. And to me that made a lot of the hard work worth it.
Yeah, I probably used the wrong word, fun. It's maybe rewarding. In the hindsight, you put in all of this effort, you get a great result for truly just clients that have gone through something that, like you said, none of us can imagine. The sense of satisfaction must just be immense. And kudos to you all for such an amazing result. And I want to thank you all for taking time out of your very busy lives and professional careers to talk with us. So Chris, Ciara, Omeed, thank you so much for appearing on this program, and congratulations to you and your clients for a truly just result.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you,
And
everyone.
good to finally
And
meet
until
you.
next, yeah, it's great to meet you too. And to our listeners, thank you for listening in again. We'll be back next time with another episode of the Colorado Trial Lawyer Connection podcast, where we love to talk with trial lawyers about what they do, what worked, what didn't work, and bring some of those real life Colorado trial lawyer stories to life. So we'll see you all, hear you all next time. Thanks for listening. Thank you for joining us. We hope you've gained valuable insights and inspiration from today's courtroom warriors. And thank you for being in the arena. Make sure to subscribe and join us next time as we continue to dissect real cases and learn from Colorado's top trial lawyers. Our mission is to empower our legal community, helping us to become better trial lawyers to effectively represent our clients. Keep your connection to Colorado's best trial lawyers alive at www.thectlc.com.